Hello, and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Tori, and this is my best friend, Holland.
Hello.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment by different categories out of a total score of 10, with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. We'll break down everything as we go, so it doesn't get confusing. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. Be sure to tread lightly because there will be hot takes and spoilers ahead. Cut to the intro. All right, today I chose the first episode of Hotel de Luna, which is a Korean TV show, for us to review. This was blind to me, actually not blind to you, which, considering the subject matter, is unusual for us. Mm-hmm. But it has been something that I've been wanting to watch for a while. It was recommended to us by one of Holland's friends years ago, and you watched it, I think, at that time, and I did not.
I did.
But if this is new to you, here is some spoiler-free background before we get into it. So, Hotel de Luna is a Korean drama. It was released on July 13th, 2019, or at least the first episode was. I apologize in advance if I mess up any name pronunciations, but I'm going to do my best. So it was written by Oh Chung-hwan and written by the Hong sisters, who are apparently very famous for writing dramas in Korea. I had never heard of them, but apparently they are pretty well known. Obviously produced in South Korea. The two main stars of the show are Lee Ji-eun, who is also known as IU. She is a solo singer in Korea as well. And Yo Jin-gu, who plays the manager of the hotel. So synopsis, I pulled one up for the first episode. It is kind of long, but bear with me. I'm going to go through it as quickly as I can. 1,000 years ago, Jang Man-wol is a female warrior who has killed numerous enemies, but she's filled with guilt for being responsible for the deaths of her comrades. In her search for the guest house where the dead can finally rest, she meets a makeshift pub, an old woman tells her of the guest house of the moon. Unknown to her, that old woman is Mago, who is a deity disguised in human form. I did not know this. Google told me this. Apparently that has something to do with like Korean creation myths. So Mago is like a creator goddess, is like in the lore. See, I wouldn't have known that, but I found that out. Okay, so after the tree swallows up her sword, Jang Man-wol sees the guest house of the moon appear before her eyes, built from pieces of wood blown into place by the strong wind. Fast forward to 1998, Mago, now a flower seller, meets a young boy named Chen-sung and his father. She prophesies to Chen-sung about what lies in his future, and meanwhile Jang Man-wol is the stylish, finicky, and ruthless owner of the opulent Hotel de Luna, which was the guest house of the moon, where restless ghosts come to stay. Chen-sung's father ends up in the Hotel de Luna, where he meets the ghost of a woman who was killed and dumped into a river, but Manager No recognizes that he is still alive and chases him away. Manager No and the other hotel staff, receptionists, guest manager, and bartender become afraid of the consequences if Jang Man-wol finds out that a living human's in the hotel. Jang Man-wol catches Chen-sung's father stealing the blue flowers from the ancient tree that swallowed up her sword, and when Chen-sung's father begs for his life, Jang Man-wol strikes a deal with him. He can live for another 20 years, but he must give Chen-sung to her after that point. So that's kind of like the synopsis for the first episode.
Which, I guess, well, I mean, I think I saw the second episode. I don't remember it very well. But it's kind of the premise of the show, right? But it does kind of spoil a little bit of the first episode.
Yeah. So, a couple quick facts and then we'll get into it. So it was the most viewed TVN drama of 2019 and has become the 8th highest rated Korean series in cable television history.
Wow.
Episode 1 had 2.037 million viewers on the original air date, and it was nominated for 13 awards. It won five of those, and 4 of those wins were being related to the original soundtrack, which I found interesting, that the soundtrack won more awards than any other category of the show. In 2020, it was announced that an American adaptation would be made, but no further significant production announcements have been made, so I don't know if that's still a thing. And then in 2022, a stage musical adaptation was premiered in Korea. So it's got a bunch of I guess more what am I thinking? More notoriety than I realized when I first started watching. So Holland, I guess go ahead and kick us off with our first category.
All right. So for TV shows, our first category is plot, story, and cohesion. So this is kind of a category that we can also use for subsequent episodes make sure that they're cohesive with the rest of the season, and then seasons are cohesive with other seasons as well. So it's kind of a broad thing, but for the first episode, it's not necessarily applicable. So total possible score of 2. I give this 1 out of 2 points. In general, I think the premise is really interesting. I think it's pretty engaging. Like, you jump in and you're kind of get these flashback scenes, if you will, of the beginning of the, our female protagonist's past, which was, back in, kind of the feudal era of Korea. The concept of her being a warrior, and I was like, this kind of feels like Mulan versus the Huns, because that's, I'm an American. I don't have a great depth of knowledge of intricate Asian history. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my like frame of reference, to kind of like hang a little peg on there. And then the concept of there being a hotel for restless souls, who are, the hotel for the dead, is an interesting concept as well. I do think that there are some, kind of like you mentioned, when Tori and I were watching this first episode, the internet will tell you that this stranger that she encounters, who kind of tells her where this guest house or hotel is for the dead, kind of gives you a little bit of that lore, is apparently a significant individual in Korean, mythology. But I didn't know that. That was really completely, and they don't explicitly spell it out for you. I didn't really even see the connection between this being the same individual in the present day, or like in the 90s.
The old lady that gives the flowers to the little boy.
That was the same individual that met our female protagonist, all those years ago. So on the one hand, I think as far as story delivery goes and the way the plot's delivered to you, I don't mind that it doesn't spell out everything, like spoon feed you all this information. I like that we kind of piece together the lore of this world as we go, but I also think that for a non-Korean audience, there are some areas where these areas of cultural translation, there's some deficit there, and you don't get to appreciate the full experience because you're not having these things explained to you. Now, if you grew up in, if you were familiar with these kinds of significant individuals in Korean history, culture, mythology, however you want to call it, I think that then you just have a more rich experience as you're watching the first episode. But I don't think it's necessarily a negative or a positive, but it can impact how you're understanding and
I think it definitely adds a layer of clarity if you know those things prior to.
Right. And so I think because of that, I do feel like I need a little disclaimer. I don't think it is necessary for a Korean film to spell out details that the Korean audience doesn't need, just because it may someday be seen by a Western audience. So I don't think that's a fault of the creators, because that probably was something that was very clear to Korean audiences. They probably picked up on those things because it is part of their world and their culture. I think, though, that there are still good areas of exposition, even though there might be some cultural things that get maybe lost in cultural translation. There are some good areas of exposition. So, for example, when the owner of the hotel, the boss, protagonist is speaking to this cop that is deceased and explaining to her kind of these concepts of, if you as a ghost get revenge, then you'll affect how you're reincarnated. The staff at the hotel kind of explain, these are ghosts that are waiting to go into the afterlife. If you have unfinished business, you don't want to go into the afterlife yet. You want to complete, some things that you still have to resolve. The way that individuals who are in the hotel, either members of the hotel or ghosts that are staying in the hotel, the way that they are able to interact with the world. I did like that a lot of that was set up in what felt like relatively natural dialogue. I think it's good storytelling when the way that this exposition is delivered in dialogue feels very organic versus these two individuals who have no reason to have an expositional conversation now all of a sudden are explaining things just for the sake of the audience.
Yeah, info dump.
So the exposition, the dialogue exposition, I do think was done very well. And I think overall these are pretty strong points. I think the tone of the film, it's a bit macabre with these individuals who are dead and they're still in the same condition of how they died. But there's enough comedy and lightheartedness that it doesn't feel like you're watching a horror film. It doesn't feel like you're watching something that's going to be overly dark or overly heavy. So that when we have comedic moments or lighthearted moments, that we're not caught off guard by those moments. I do think there are some negatives, though, in some of the plot of this. The fact that the characters' names are really not given to us as audience members, I think that that's kind of confusing. I still, until you read them, like, I don't know what anybody's name is. I think some parts where a character has maybe an internal monologue and they're speaking out loud to themselves just feels a little bit corny. There's a scene when the dad who ends up, I guess, quote unquote, mistakenly at the hotel before he's actually dead, he's talking to himself about the things that he's seeing or experiencing in the hotel, and he's just literally talking out loud to himself. It feels really cheesy and corny, and I don't think it's necessarily a flaw of the actor necessarily, but it feels like it's given like a really over dramatic delivery. So it just seems a little hokey. And then overall, the plot, I think, is a bit derivative of kind of like the Beauty and the Beast plot, where you have this individual in a home, a father of father comes in, he angers the owner of this dwelling, and then there's even roses and flowers involved, and he picks a flower, and then he has to make a deal that his son is going to have to come and live with the owner of this, hotel. I mean, that's like straight out of like the Grimm Brothers Beauty and the Beast fairy tale. So I think that it's not necessarily a flaw to derive story notes from classic fairy tales, but it all feels really on the nose, and it's not delivered to us as like, here's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It's like, here's a completely original story, and then as you're watching it, you're kind of like, oh, huge plots of this is just taken straight from the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale. So to me, it felt really on the nose, and almost too much so. The way that I think that our main female protagonist, like the boss of the hotel, like she does have a lot of character growth. She's not a very, warm or friendly or kind person. She's paying off her debt in a way by being the owner of this hotel, or the boss or manager of this hotel. I think that's an interesting concept, but then as you continue watching, you're like, oh, this is kind of like just Beauty and the Beast. So I did think that was a bit derivative. A couple other things, just in this episode specifically, I thought that the kid being left alone while his dad's dying and he's watching them do CPR, that shouldn't happen.
I have a note about that too. I'm like, who let that happen?
I hope that doesn't happen in Korean hospitals. It's just
a child can literally just watch his father die in a hospital bed.
And then
no.
Father is allegedly dead on the table, and he's just in that room all by himself, crying. I thought that towards the end, when the son is now an adult and the boss gets stabbed by a rebar by a homeless guy, and she basically is like, you can leave, bye, I'm giving you an out. It's completely nonsensical. And then when he does like the honorable thing to like come and try and save her, she's like, guess what, you're never leaving. It's like, that made no sense to me. It's like, okay, you would think that this is going to be an opportunity to like reward him for his good heart that he has, and it's like he just did the opposite. He had the opportunity to like leave and be rid of this and go away and never have to deal with this, crazy magical world ever again, and instead, because he does the good and honorable thing by trying to save this woman's life, then it's like, oh, guess what, now you're mine forever. ha ha ha. Like, that, it just didn't make any sense, and it felt like it didn't merit anything. It didn't change anything in the plot. It didn't change anything within either of our characters. I just felt like it was really weird, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me in the overall, like, story. I also thought the whole bit with when you can first see the ghosts, and that ghost has the sunglasses on because she doesn't have any eyes, like, that whole part was just way too long. It was super corny. It was really cheesy. I felt like I was watching a sketch for, like, a show geared for middle schoolers, not like an adult TV show. And then those were really the primary negatives I had, but there were some positives. I did like the overall lore, kind of the overall concept. I really liked the twist that the ghost, that she clearly looks like she's drowned. You find out that she was a cop, and now she gets to kind of haunt this guy that did her wrong, or, you know, maybe was responsible for her death, and things like that. And I thought that was a really nice twist. The fact that the father wasn't actually dead was kind of a nice twist. So there were some nice, like, twists and turns in there, but it wasn't like 100% for me. I felt like just because some of it was pretty derivative, and some of the parts, the delivery of the plot was either didn't make quite a lot of sense, or it was just a little too cheesy. That's why I only gave it half credit. So 1 out of 2.
Okay. So for me, for plot, story, and cohesion, I gave this 1.5 points out of 2. I agree with a lot of what you said. Some of it bothers me less, though. Like, for instance, I had a note about that scene where he realizes he can see, like, the ghosts. And I agree that it's too long, but I do think that it gives a little moment of levity where one is needed in kind of like the flow of the story. So it bothered me a little bit less. I agree it's too long, but I still think that it was necessary. So for me, I think starting with the flashback is good in the regards of storytelling, but it kind of, in a way, at least in my view, it kind of bait and switched you in regards to the overall tone of the show. Because I think it starts out feeling like this is going to be very serious and, you know, very, like, I wouldn't say all the way to heavy, but like a way more dramatic than it is. And so while I think it's a great way to kind of see how the main character, Manuel, ends up the owner of the hotel, it's necessary in regards to that. When we get back to present time, it feels a little like now I don't really know what I'm watching or what to expect. So there's a little bit, I guess it could be a positive that, like, it's a subversion of expectation, but to me it kind of just felt like a little bit of a rift between overall tone. Because aside from the flashback, I would describe the tone as Lemony Snicket meets The Haunted Mansion from Disney, and I kind of like that blend, like that overall sort of, like, there's a little bit of like whimsy, but it's never anything like, it's not like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory whimsy,
right?
It's a little more subtle than that, and I think that the overall just sort of like directional vibe, even a lot of the aesthetic vibe, which I'll talk about later, it kind of feels like it's sort of in that wheelhouse. Like, you could watch this with those two things and it would feel similar, like they're similar things going on. And I enjoyed that. But I didn't get that vibe until after we were past the flashbacks. I do think that the idea in general of this premise is really interesting. This idea of sort of like, now you have to own this hotel to repay for the souls that you've taken. This whole idea of like the tree has sort of this, it's like the tree has like a knowledge or personality of its own. It chooses Manuel in a way. It sort of chooses Chan Sung's dad when he is in the garden. Like, that whole idea is kind of interesting to me, and I don't fully understand it yet, and I think that's purposeful, because if this is a series with multiple episodes, you don't want to give all information, obviously, in the first episode. But I think everything that we're sort of getting, all the revelations that we get are very interesting concepts to me, and I hope that they play out in ways that aren't dissatisfying, because I feel like there's a lot of magic involved, and we've said this about other things that have magic involved, and that when you establish magic as being part of a story, there needs to be rules to that magic, and that those rules need to be followed. And while magic in this episode is kind of explained as necessary, you touched on that, kind of these natural expositions of like, why is this hotel here? What does it do? What's the purpose? Like, those things are explained, but there are a lot more things that are kind of teased or suggested that we don't get explanations for in this. So I'm hoping that it's hard to say because I haven't watched anything past episode 1, but there's a lot of potential for a lot of plot holes to come from the magic. And while I don't see any glaring plot holes this early, I am a little nervous with how heavy the magic seems to be, because I think it could have the potential of feeling really messy later. So I'm not using that as a negative for this episode, just acknowledging the fact that they have a lot that they kind of establish in this first episode in regards to just how the world works. I do think that the kid, like the scene within the hospital with the kid, like watching, it's so weird to me.
Yeah.
It feels jarring. And then I started laughing, and I'm like, I don't think I'm supposed to be laughing while this kid is sobbing over his dad, like dying in a hospital bed. Like, that should be like a really emotional, we should be feeling for the kid. And right now, all I keep thinking is, where are the adults?
Right.
And how come nobody is like mediating this situation? Like, it just seemed ridiculous to me. And then overall, I think that I kind of agree with you about like it being a little derivative of something that feels familiar, but for me, I kind of like that. I don't mind fairy tale retellings as long as it's not like the one for one like beat. And I think there are enough deviations that I'm kind of like, okay, I like seeing the certain parallels, because there are enough differences that I don't feel like I'm just watching like some sort of gender bend Beauty and the Beast. And I am hoping that the differences feel more vast as the show goes on, but I just don't know. I also, one of the biggest probably the biggest issue I have with this episode is I wasn't sure whether to put this in character notes or plot notes, and I ended up putting it in plot notes because I genuinely do not understand the motivations of Manuel for most of this episode. So she makes this deal, right, that she'll let this guy who shouldn't be in the hotel for the dead, or whatever, he shouldn't be here, so she's going to allow him to live 20 more years with the caveat that at the end of the 20 years, I get your son or whatever. But why is my question. Yeah. And I will be frustrated if this is not fully explained, because why, number one. Then, okay, now we go into the future, and they meet on the subway, and they have what I consider a very interesting scene where he kind of realizes that like something is going on. He understands that she's the one that's been sending him flowers every year on his birthday, and she gives him the ability to see ghosts. Like that whole, I think it's a very significant scene as far as for the plot goes.
Yeah.
And then, they have their little moment where he realizes I really can see ghosts or whatever. And then everything from that point on, I don't understand what she's trying to do. They go to dinner. Okay, cool. That seems like that could be a heartwarming moment. But then she has a few really snarky comments toward him or whatever. And then the whole go buy me a bubble tea. And then she gets stabbed with this piece of rebar from the guy who was the guy she basically scared, the politician or whatever that she scared for the dead policewoman. So it's like, okay, I'm seeing the ties connect here as far as character to character. But then, like you said, it's like she kind of was like, you can go, and he doesn't because he's a good man and he's trying to do right by her. But then she's like, now you're trapped forever. And I'm like, I don't understand you at all. Like, do you guys have a respect for each other? Is this all a big game to you? Like,
Right.
I don't understand what she wants most of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
And that frustrated me a lot because I get that we're probably supposed to learn more. She's supposed to be kind of mysterious. You know, I'm sure that's a character note for her. But when that affects how she's functioning in the plot so much that I'm like, I don't know what you want. Like, she seems wishy-washy, and so it makes the plot feel not as stable as it should. And in my opinion, a first episode's plot should be really stable, even if you don't get all the answers right away. I should have a clear, distinct idea of like what the goal is, what the motivation is, what we're working toward here. We still don't know why she even wants him for the hotel. She wants him to be the manager. Okay, but like, why? You have a hotel manager.
Yeah.
There's a whole scene where he's like, got to take this money, you know, to pay back the debts or whatever. It's like, so if you have a manager, why do you need this kid? This guy. I mean, he's not a kid anymore, obviously.
Yeah.
But like, that part, I just don't understand. So that was like the biggest glaring negative for me. Also, Chansong having previous hotel experience is a very interesting plot point to me, because did he know? Because there's this sort of like unclear understanding, I guess. He acknowledges that like his father had described her to him, so he kind of knew like what to expect as far as like what her appearance would be. And he knows she's been sending him flowers, but this whole I'm taking you to be my hotel manager is not clearly explicitly stated that he knew that that was the goal.
Right.
Or that it's, so it makes me think like, if you didn't want to be tied to this woman after 20 years, then I would be doing something completely different with my life.
Or something.
Yeah, so like, why would you go into hospitality unless you knew that that was what you were going to have to be doing eventually anyway, so you might as well get good at it. So that part I didn't really understand.
I thought the same thing, and then the second time I saw it, I think that his question to the when he's like interviewing for a new job or whatever, he's asking about like, have you ever seen this hotel that's like has all these amenities and it has vines growing on the outside?
Yeah.
It makes me wonder like, oh, was that like, did that influence him as a child and he thought that someday I want to work at that hotel? And it wasn't necessarily related to, I mean, this is reaching for sure.
But it seems confusing to me that like, if his father is going to describe Manuel, why would he, and he obviously described the hotel.
Yeah.
Chansong should know that they're connected, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So then at that point, it's like, maybe he did want to be there. And it's not, the deal isn't as dark as they're making it turn out to like sound like it is.
Or maybe he didn't understand that this hotel was anything like supernatural.
Oh, maybe
his dad was saying you need to stay away from that woman. She's crazy and dangerous. But this hotel was amazing.
Maybe.
And he's thinking, well, this lady's probably not still working there if he thinks that she's not anything like.
Yeah, so it's just a little vague. I mean,
definitely.
We're speculating.
Definitely.
So that vagueness, I think, was a little bit of a problem too, because I'm like, I'm just unclear as to why he would already have 10 years at this point of hotel experience. Like, okay.
Yep.
All right. Pro over here, I guess. So anyway, so all of those things, you know, I definitely had some obvious negatives, but I think overall I'm really interested in how this story is starting to unfold. So I settled on 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay. So for next category is character. So total possible score of 3. I gave this 1 out of 3. You kind of touched a lot on a couple of the points that I had with the boss character, I wrote down her name as Mulan because I didn't know her name. So Mulan's character, which I'm sure that is really offensive to people from South Korea because Mulan is Chinese.
Yeah.
But she looks like Mulan at the beginning of the film. She's got a cool outfit, and I like Mulan, so it's a compliment. Specifically with her motives. Like, we don't have a good understanding of her motives. And actually, until you just read that synopsis, I thought that her, like, at the very beginning of the episode, that her motivation for, like, feeling the need to repay her debt was feeling the need to repay her debt for the people that she had killed. But it sounds like she wants to repay her debt for her troops that were with her that died alongside her, is what it sounds like, which I think is way more interesting than her feeling regretful of fighting enemies in a war.
Yeah, this synopsis said she's filled with guilt for being responsible for the deaths of her comrades.
So that, I think it would have been... I think she's a very interesting character. I wish that was integrated a bit more, or at least made a little more clear in kind of her introduction. I think the flashback scene immediately makes her very interesting. She seems pretty honorable in the sense that she feels kind of a moral responsibility for taking lives or being the cause of other people's death. The concept that now she is the hotel owner of a hotel that cares for people that are kind of in limbo, if you will, I think makes it very interesting. And then the fact that the way that she kind of is when we're introduced to her in present day is still pretty consistent with what we would expect to see in this character we're introduced to at the beginning of the episode, and yet also has a lot of room for her to grow, in the sense that she seems very cold, she's very harsh, she's relatively self-serving, but she's still doing her job. You know, she hasn't decided to just, you know, peace out and do something different. It doesn't seem like she would have the capability to do that anyways. But I think that it's a good setup for a protagonist. I thought there was a little bit of... I also thought there was a nice moment of nuance with her character, that she's not dead yet because she can't die yet. And that was something that I didn't catch the first time I saw this episode, but I think it just makes her very interesting in that she has a little bit of weight in that. I think the subtlety of that is really, really good and really interesting. However, I do think, like you mentioned in plot, I kind of think in character, her understanding her motive is very difficult to do in this film. Why does she want this kid? What's the significance? Why does this tree producing flowers seem to give her kind of a change of heart moment? It just seems very muddy, and I'm sure that we will find out as we continue to watch the show. But I wish there was a little bit more clarity so we could kind of understand a little bit more of why she wants what she wants. But I do think it's a good setup. The other characters of the father and son, and our main female protagonist, again, they're all really like Beauty and the Beast archetypes. Like the dad, and then I think it's kind of tropey for the dad to be this kind of like petty thief. And then his son has this like strong moral character and like doesn't want him to steal and doesn't want him to, you know, break the law, and wants him to, you know, make good choices essentially, and not just do all these kind of like seedy, you know, underhanded things in the name of providing for his son. I think it's a good setup, but it is pretty flat, I think, in establishing the characters. And I don't really mind it that much because the father character, I think, is the weakest character, and he seems to only be necessary for this first episode, and then he's probably gonna not even be part of the picture because the son says that his father's died. Yeah. Unless he shows up at the hotel at some point, you know, then that might be kind of interesting. But I think overall the father's just very unlikable. The acting doesn't seem very great. I don't think this is a snub on the actor. I think he was just kind of told to be very over the top and exaggerated as kind of a comic relief character, but I think it's a little too over the top. And then I just found him really annoying. The son, I think setting him up as kind of this moral, kind boy, and then he grows into a relatively respectable young man, I think is a good setup. We know there's going to be this kind of juxtaposition between our male and female protagonists, that they're kind of opposites. And I just feel like it's already coming. This is going to be an enemies to lovers kind of story.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
I didn't. I wasn't expecting that.
100%. I'm calling it now. I think it's absolutely.
I have no idea what to expect, but I was not.
Absolutely.
I was not
end up
like,
being a romance.
They're definitely going to fall in love.
100%. I think 100%.
Oh, okay.
They're gonna end up falling in love. It's gonna be Beauty and the Beast.
Okay.
That's the plot.
Okay.
I'm calling it now. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But that's what I'm calling it.
Okay.
I saw it as soon as they you have these two young, attractive people, and they're the only main characters. It's gonna happen. They're gonna fall in love. It's just gonna happen.
We'll see. All right.
The fact that he went and grabbed the cart and is like, no, I'll save you. Like, come on. It's like Prince Charming coming in and saving her.
I was just like, well, he's a nice guy. Like, I didn't think about it that. I was just like, he just doesn't want to leave this lady dying on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Nope, it's going to be an enemies to lovers plot, 100%. But again, with the motive, what motive does he have to not leave her? Other than the fact that, I don't want you to die. But you really seem okay. You're not even bleeding. You're clearly this magical person. What motive does he possibly have to not, leave? Other than the fact that he thinks that she's dying. I feel like it's kind of a weak point. He doesn't even know her. So I thought that was kind of just a weak moment in character. I wish we had some other motive for him to kind of stay or to not leave that came from more of an internal compulsion rather than oh no, somebody stabbed you with rebar and oh no, I'm gonna save you. I feel like that was kind of a weak moment, not just for plot but also for character. I think that again, I'm sure that we'll dig into it more and learn more about him as we go. With the characters of the hotel manager and the staff, they all seem very kind people. I wrote that they all have this moment when the dad is in the hotel. And apparently they all can tell that he's not actually dead. I wrote in the cartoon Beauty and the Beast, the Disney movie, when they're like, there's a girl in the castle. That's what I wrote. Because that's what that felt like to me the whole time.
They're Cogsworth, Lumiere, and
all of them, they're all
the wardrobe or whatever.
There's a girl in the castle. That's what it felt like. They mostly seem to play for comedy, but I do like how the manager is that nice foil to the boss and how he's kind of that voice of reason, kind of feels the freedom to rein her in a little bit and kind of moderate her impulses, if you will, and I think that makes for a really interesting character. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Why does she want this living young man to come and be the manager when she already has one? Seems very uncertain, unless she knows you're not going to be around much longer. I'm starting to look for your replacement.
Maybe his unfinished business is wrapping up soon or something.
Right. And then the ghosts overall, I think they're very interesting, with the exception of the one ghost that's like a cop. They all really seem to be plot devices rather than actual characters. So overall, I think the characters are a nice setup for what to expect in this show. But they really kind of feel flat. There's a lot of kind of tropes and archetypes used to kind of set them up. And I wish we had a little bit more depth. I think we clearly have room for growth for our one main protagonist, but everybody else, it doesn't seem like we have any setup for them to kind of grow or change or flaws. So that's why I only give it 1 out of 3 points, because it feels very introductory, and that's not a bad thing. I just think it's just doesn't make for really deep characters for this episode. I think the casting's great. I think the acting is great, with the exception of the father character, but I don't think that's that actor's fault. I think that's just the direction he was given. But overall, 1 out of 3.
Okay. So for me, for characters, I went with 1.5 points out of 3. So just a little bit better than you. I agree that the worst character in this episode is Chen Sung's father. And another reason that I feel really unsatisfied is because I felt like they were kind of suggesting like the father was going to have this really nice moment of like growth and just this potential of like turning his life around for real. And then after he strikes the deal, he wakes up okay in the hospital, and then we don't see him again until it's told to us that he has died. And I'm like, well, dang, I was hoping that we would get like the nice side of the coin of this character who is, it to me was the most frustrating and annoying character in the show. So it almost felt like the father was more of a plot device than like an actual character as well, because he's presented as kind of a caricature of a poor father. And that's basically what he's branded as, you know. He's even the like deity goddess lady or whatever who was in the flashback and then reappears, she makes a comment like, your stroke of bad luck is having a father like that. Yeah. And so he is branded straight from the beginning as sort of this drunkard who gambles too much, and you know, he may be physically present for his son, but he's not really providing him like a stable life. And so I was like, man, well, that guy kind of sucks. And so he has this whole situation where he goes to the hotel and he strikes this deal, and then you're like, what? Like, I was hoping that we would get something better from you. So that was just really disappointing for me, is that he's, you know, you got this crappy dude. And don't get me wrong, you know, you have to kind of have these antagonistic or, you know, poor characters sometimes to tell a good story, because everybody in a story can't be great and awesome and wonderful and kind. Like, there has to be differences in these characters, but it just seemed like almost like a tease, that they were like teasing that he was gonna do better with his life, and then we never get to see the fruition of that, and that was just really frustrating for me personally. I do like the character of Manuel, but I do not like that it takes 47 minutes of an hour-long episode to learn her name. Yeah. They do not speak her name for 47 minutes. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you're practically at the credits. And so that was very frustrating for me as well. And I understand why. And it's just, or the hotel boss. Like, that's all you can call her, because we don't actually know her name. And I just think that's a really poor way to get especially an international audience hooked into a show, because Korean names are going to obviously be more difficult for a Western audience to remember in general, because they're very different from how our names are. So if you're going to wait till the end of a first episode to give us a name, like, that's just more, it makes it more difficult for a Western audience to remember, because it's like, we've only had 10 minutes to memorize this. Chen Sung, I think, is a little bit more memorable, because at least we hear his name way earlier in the show. I think it's with the first time we meet him as a little boy and his father calls his name, but I can't remember anybody else's names, because I really don't think that they're saying names that often. And I think it's really true of any show, but especially a show in a language that's not yours, it's not native to you, is like, please do us the favor and repeat people's names. And I think that's true even of American shows sometimes too. I mean, we watched a few episodes of The Pacific, and right now, like, especially the first episode, I struggled sometimes to remember people's names, because they said them once and then I don't hear them again for 40 minutes. And so it's like, it's difficult. And I think that, you know, I put this more into characters, because I think it really, I mean, these are the labels for your characters, are their names. And if we don't hear any names, like, please do not expect me to remember them. Yeah. But it makes it very difficult to keep things and people straight if we don't have names taught to us, you know, at a good clip. I'm really curious to see how deep we're going to go with each character, because I mean, I expect that with Manuel and Chen Sung, they're probably the characters we're going to end up learning the most about throughout the course of the show. But also these side characters, you know, this hotel staff and this goddess deity lady or whatever her name is. I think that, they are potentially very interesting characters as well, and I hope that they are not simply used throughout the whole story as plot devices or, like convenience characters. I don't want that from them. And so while I found each of them to be very interesting on the surface, I'm just really curious to see how deep they're going to go, because we don't go very deep in this episode. Not even with our main characters, really. I think perhaps the deepest character at this point is Manuel. Even though her motivations are so confusing, at least she seems to have the most nuance to her. But I think she's kind of like a mixed bag at this point, and she's difficult to read. She's obviously bittered from all of these years of being this hotel boss, and you can tell she's kind of over it. And I think she drowns a lot of that boredom in all of the, champagnes and fruits and jewelry and things that this opulent sort of lifestyle. I think a lot of that kind of appears to be almost like a cover or a mask for the fact that she's just really bitter and really bored at this point. And so I find that to be kind of an interesting character trait of hers as well. Also, I like the kind of dynamic between Manuel and Chansung, but it does get so confusing at times. This whole, I don't know if they're actually friendly with each other or hate their guts, because her motivations are so unclear, that it just feels sometimes like I don't know what to expect from them, or I don't know what to like root for here. Do I root for him to get out of this situation as quickly as possible? Do I root for her to warm up to him and actually like reveal parts of herself that are, a little deeper than surface? Like, I don't really know what to like cheer for, because I want to cheer for them. Like, I think they're likable characters, and I think they've been introduced in a way that's made it very clear that like they're kind of the carrying protagonists of the show. So, we naturally want to like root for them, but we don't really know what to root for. And we don't really know what their goal is or what they're working toward at this point. And so I think those are just kind of like hard. It's hard to root for characters that we don't know anything about at this point. And so I do agree with your statement of like, this is very introductory. And I do think that all of the introductory stuff that has been laid is very good. And I think that, like you said, the acting is very good. And I like the castings, and everybody feels natural to their role. And so I just want to see, like, I just want more. And that's really where a lot of the negative of me not giving full credit for this comes from, is because I just want more. I'm not satisfied with where we are with these characters. And so I do think that would naturally kind of correct itself as the series goes on. But right now it's like I finished the episode feeling like I need more to understand. So for that, I gave it 1.5 points out of 3.
All right, so our next category is aesthetic, so total possible score of 2. I give this 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay.
Overall, I think the visuals on this show are really good. It does have that, I think even visually, like, your description was really good. It's kind of a combination of, like, Lemony Snicket and, like, Disney's Haunted Mansion, like the ride, not the movie.
Right.
But, so I think it's this nice blend of this kind of whimsical, but yet still kind of macabre and... I wouldn't say dark, but just kind of unexpected. Maybe like a little bit like Beetlejuice, I guess would be kind of a way I would describe it.
That would fit kind of same vibe.
Yeah. I think overall, I thought in general, kind of the fight choreography at the beginning, when Mulan's fighting the other soldiers, was really good. The cinematography feels like film level cinematography, instead of just like straight up like 2-camera TV show setup. I really liked that. I like that they balance visuals with the audio. There's nice balance between visuals and audio to avoid this kind of horror aspect. So like when you're seeing a ghost that the ghost that turns out to be the cop. And she's got this very, like, corpse looking makeup on. She's wet. She's, everything's kind of like, pulled down. Her hair's wet. She's in this, outfit. She's got dark circles under her eyes. And yet when she's like walking through the hotel, there's like nice music playing.
It's like whimsical.
Right.
Yeah. Whatever,
and so you might have these episodes with this like dark visual, like that could be really scary. And then the music gives you a nice levity to it.
Did you ever see the Disney Channel original movie Halloween Town?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I was going to say it kind of that like whimsical music with what could be scary looking is something that they use a little bit too.
Yeah.
So it made me think of that.
Yeah. I think probably the best aspect of this show though is the costumes and the set design. I think they're just absolutely phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Everything in camera looks like it belongs there. It feels very real. It feels very organic. A lot of practical, like in-camera effects, certain lighting that's used, with the exception of the flowers. Every flower in this film looks like a silk flower. And I think that's kind of like a shame. Like, could we not get like one real flower in there at some point? Every flower you see does not look like a real flower. It looks like a silk flower. And I think that's the one like practical, like on camera piece that I think looks a little lackluster. I also think an area where the aesthetics are not that great is the CGI. It looks really dated even for 2019. I would have guessed that this was the CGI and this was filmed in like 2010 because the CGI, the bird flying at the beginning, it's just like Adobe stock footage image of a bird flying. Even the hotel when it's building itself, like the hotel looks good. And then when it starts like rapidly building and it's like multiple stories high like a skyscraper, it looks like kind of like a PC video game like quality. So there's areas where anything that's CGI, I feel like it looks very dated for 2019. I would have never guessed that this film was made in 2019 just on the CGI alone. I would have guessed more like 2008, 2010, and I understand that CGI is expensive. It costs a lot of money. But I also think that some aspects of the CGI that's used in this film, like you didn't even need it. Like it was a little unnecessary. When the dad's a ghost and he's turning into a ghost, that CGI was another area I didn't like. The snake on the bottle looks, it looks pretty fake. It looks like a 2010.
You know what I
golden
thought it looked
snake.
like?
What?
In the Ella Enchanted movie?
Yes.
It looks like that.
It did. It did. Which came out in like 2004. So
yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And then the other one when she gets stabbed with the rebar and then she pulls it out and is like levitating in her hand and it's like spinning around. I'm like, again, it kind of looks like PC graphics from the 2000s. So the CGI, I think, is almost distractingly bad in this film. And then some of the editing moments I don't really like either. And again, maybe this is just a cultural difference, but I can only critique things from my own point of view. So the end editing just feels very like K-drama cheesy. Like the very end, like before we get to the end title credits where it's like cutting back and forth between like our main two protagonists.
Yeah,
and it's
I think it's indicative to Korean dramas.
Yeah.
Like it feels like Korean, like we just need like a Subway cup because the product placement is always happening and stuff like that.
And then also on the train with that scene, I like the lighting on that and it feels like the tension's kind of building in that moment. I like that. But the cuts back and forth when she is on the train car with him and then she gives him the gift to like his birthday gift to see the ghosts. I thought that editing was just very over the top and it felt kind of long, and then the cuts back and forth between the two of them. Again, that's why I think this is going to be an enemies to lovers movie, because I felt like that's what they were trying to do in the first episode. So some of the editing points and then some of the CGI was the reason I didn't give it full points. But overall, the costumes look great. Her costumes are phenomenal. The set pieces, the set design, that just the opening credits, or maybe like kind of around the opening credit mark, just her office, the way it looks, and it's panning across all those photos of her, like, and she hasn't aged, and then like when she's sitting in her office, like all the little tiny details of everything just look really, really nice. And it's neat to see that somebody took that much like care and attention to something that's physically on film. So I really liked that especially. So 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay, so for aesthetics for me, I also gave this 1.5 points out of 2. With pretty much the
pattern going on here.
Yeah. Well, no, I was a little bit higher. Well, yeah, I have a pattern, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So with the same critiques pretty much that you have, but I'll talk about some of the positives first. I thought the choice to basically open the show with the Moonlight Sonata playing was really nice. Number one, it's a classic, and it's known obviously internationally, and I think it really kind of set this mood of like this mysterious, obviously moon-based idea of like this location, and I just thought it was like a really nice choice to start with something as an established song instead of like an original piece. And I know that might sound weird, but I think it's a great way to get your audience engaged, because I would say a majority of your audience watching this show is going to recognize that tune. And so now you have my attention because I already am familiar with what I'm hearing right now. So I thought it was a great tool to kind of like bring you in right at the beginning, with that being like your first piece of music. So I really enjoyed that. Also, they have some really good cinematography shots. Also in the flashback at the beginning, she pulls the blade and she holds it up like this, and you can see her eyes reflected in the blade. And I thought that was just such a nice shot, like something that I would not have thought to do is to get a shot like that. And I just thought it was so nice, just great cinematography. Like you said, the sets are so great. And I think it's really nice to see sets that feel like the characters living in them belong in them. So this idea that she has kind of gone from like dirty wounded soldier to opulent, commanding, like owner of this hotel is reflected in the costumes and set from the flashback to the present day. And I think it's just nailed how you look at her now in this hotel and you're like, this lady has money, and she likes living in the lap of luxury, and, you know, she has this sort of commanding presence, and that's all indicative to just where she's living, and I really like that. And then even if you kind of zoom out a little bit, I think the hotel in general is really, really beautiful, but not just the Hotel de Luna. Other sets are beautiful too. There's the hotel that we see briefly where Chen Sung is interviewing. Another gorgeous hotel, like, you know, have no idea like how much of that was just pre-established there or was dressed, but either way it doesn't really matter because it fits and it works. Even some of the outdoor scenes, like the flashbacks in the beginning, you know, that sort of like, it's almost like a pit stop area that Manuel stops at, and everything there just kind of seems to fit. All of the dishes and like weaponry and other tools that are kind of laying there, it all feels really natural. So all these props and sets and costumes, and even the hospital a really good set. Yeah, I was gonna ask you, with your medical knowledge, did it look fairly accurate? It didn't look like, oh hey, we just have this little cubicle that we're gonna dress to look like a hospital room. It looked like they filmed it on location with like real equipment in the corner and in the room. Great. And stuff like that. So yeah, it was done really well. That attention to detail is something that I just really, really appreciate, because I feel like the thing about sets is that nobody is choosing to watch the set very closely over your actors. Like in a scene, you're naturally going to be watching the actor that's performing the action or saying the words. Like that's just natural. But the thing about sets is if they don't look real, it becomes distracting and jarring. So you want your set to look real enough and natural enough that you aren't looking at it really. Except maybe in an establishing shot where it's designed to do that. It's designed to show you the location. And I just think they really nailed it in that case. I thought the music was pretty, like the score in general was pretty great. I do like this sort of juxtaposition of like the whimsical music with what could be kind of a dark subject matter, and it's lightened up or made more humorous because of the music attached. And then I also appreciate that when a situation sort of arises that's not quite as humorous, the score changes to match. And a lot of times I noticed that one or the other would kind of bleed or nicely transition into the other, where something is kind of serious and then it transitions nicely into whimsical or vice versa. And I thought that was a really nice kind of way to almost change the momentum or change the mood in the middle of something without having to cut and reset into a new location or with a new character or something like that. I thought that was just a really nice editing tool that they used in that way. Costume's incredible. Already kind of talked about that. Now here's some of my negatives. The CG is really dated. I don't think it's bad, but it doesn't look like 2019. And so because of that, I have to acknowledge that, like, I'm pretty sure they could do better. I have seen other, like, I guess Korean productions that have come out around that time with better effects. So it's not like, so I think it just comes down to they just didn't make it as high of a priority as they could have. And for a show that has such a heavy emphasis on magic, I think they probably should have budgeted a little bit more for that. So that was a little disappointing. But like I said, not bad, just in context, not good. There's also some incontinuity that I discovered in the editing. A lot of, and primarily in the scene near the end where they go to eat dinner and they're like eating dumplings or something. And Manuel is holding chopsticks.
I noticed that too.
And then it cuts to where like one of the chopsticks is like stabbed through the dumpling. Mm-hmm. And then it keeps cutting back where she's like holding a dumpling like this and then stabbed a dumpling like this. And it keeps cutting back and forth. And I was like, why did nobody catch this?
And it wouldn't be so noticeable if it wasn't these dark chopsticks and this white, dumpling.
Yeah.
And she's
for
wearing
bun
white,
or something,
and she's holding it. The shot is so close, and her hands like in frame.
Yep, and she's using her hand a lot to kind of like gesture while she talks, and it's like
it's very noticeable.
Very noticeable. There's also like this weird moment. I cannot actually remember exactly where this was, so maybe you can help me remember. But there was something that I wrote, and I was like, "Why did they do the Scooby-Doo edit?" Was it when they were like running? He was like running through town trying to like run away from the ghost or something. And it was like these weird cuts where he was like going in over here and then showing back up over here. And I was like, what in the Scooby-Doo is going on right now?
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily think it was bad, but it felt a little too whimsical. Like we'd pushed a little too far into the whimsy.
Yeah.
And now it was starting to feel a little silly or childish. So I didn't care for that very much, but thankfully they didn't like overuse it, I don't think.
Another thing I forgot to mention is his dad's like old man makeup.
Oh yeah,
terrible.
Not great.
It was terrible.
Not great. Also, I thought it was weird how in the very beginning Manuel has been traveling for however long and she's like this dirty, bloodied warrior and her face is actually pretty clean when she sits down and has like the stew or whatever and she's talking to this older woman and I'm like,
it can't cover the moneymaker.
I guess, but it sure was, it didn't feel natural. It's like, why is your face so clean? And like there's a couple smudges. She's got like one on her cheek and like one. And I'm like, but if you've been traveling on horseback,
No, she was walking. The horse was pulling a cart.
Oh, okay. But I mean, you're traveling over dirt and whatever. Yeah. Like just the motion of like dirt flying would make your face dirty after all that time. So that was just not very realistic. Also, color palettes. I want to just touch on this quickly. I love when color palettes feel cohesive and colors feel like they mean something. And like at the hotel, there are so many vivid, like royal colors, what I would consider like royal blue and royal purple and emeralds and, you know, these ruby reds and lots of golds and silvers and like, you know, shiny metallics like that. And then like you go into like even just like things on the street, and like the street lights are all like a very consistent yellow or fluorescent-y almost green, and then you have all of the like dark shadows and things are like blues and grays. And I just love when it feels like there was intention put behind not just set dressing but also in lighting and in costuming, and how colors, I want colors to like mean something and not feel like they were just haphazardly thrown together. And I think that is very evident in a lot of the aesthetics of this show. So I wanted to touch on that quickly. And then, yeah, I have a little note about like how at the very end, it really just feels like a K-drama. And you're like, okay, well, in case I forgot, I'm watching a K-drama.
Right.
And I think
all the reading didn't remind me.
And then they do the very indicative thing that K-dramas do in the credits, where it's like the credits roll and then they do almost these like misty recap shots from the episode you just watched, and then after the credits roll they do like the little teaser for the next, it's like the trailer for the next episode. And that all happens too, and I don't think that's a negative. I don't mean to say that it negatively affected my score. It's just very typical of like that kind of show, and like, you know, the production of that is very, very typical. Just very, okay, I'm watching a K-drama. This is correct. So all of that to say, 1.5 points out of 2 for aesthetics.
All right. So next category is personal taste and preference. As always, we are only allowed 2 points for this category. So out of a total possible score of 2, I give this 1 out of 2 points.
Okay.
Overall, I thought this was a fun show. It had a good balance of drama and humor without being too far in either direction. I also liked watching something that assumed the audience's intelligence and let me figure out things on my own. I thought it was a really good intro to a show. I would definitely continue watching. I do think for me personally, I'm not a purist when it comes to sub or dub, and sometimes reading the subtitles, I really get distracted and I'm so focused on reading, I miss a lot of the visuals. So that is something for me why I think for a lot of foreign films and foreign TV shows where there is not a dubbed version, I can't have like 2 out of 2 enjoyment of it, because I watched this episode twice. And for me, I am a very visual like learner. So there were a lot of things that like I just flat out did not remember from my first watch through of this episode, because I was so busy reading text that I didn't have any visual memory to like cue moments of the show to. So again, I put that here because that's not true for everyone. And I don't think it's fair to dock points anywhere when you're deliberately choosing to watch a film that's not in English.
Sure.
So I don't think it's fair, but I did want to mention it because some people also have a hard time reading subtitles. It's hard to keep up sometimes. Different translation things get changed. Certain words aren't translated exactly because there is no exact translation. So aside from the way that translation is going to change how you're able to understand the story, I think it also can affect an individual's ability to enjoy the story because you have to read everything.
Yeah.
So just I wanted to touch on that here because if that is you, if you're one of those individuals that needs to have, you know, a dubbed version. I'm not aware of a dubbed version of this show. It is on Netflix and it's subtitled. And then if you watch it on a Korean K-drama service, it probably will also be subbed there as well versus dubbed. But I wish there was a dubbed version. That would make it a little bit more enjoyable for me. But I still liked it. I would still watch it. I would keep watching it. I want to see what happens next. Even though I might think some parts are kind of predictable, I do think it's interesting enough that I would continue. So 1 out of 2.
Okay. For me, I did 1.5 points out of 2. I liked it enough that I do want to keep watching it. And I am different from you in the way that I don't really know how this is, but I can read and also kind of see what's going on, and it doesn't really detract if I'm reading subtitles. However, I will acknowledge that if I'm trying to multitask in any way, you cannot do that with a Korean drama. And sometimes it's like, I want to put something on while I'm folding and putting away laundry or doing chores around the house, and I can't do that with something that's not in English because it's the only language that I speak. And it's definitely not a detraction or like a critique. I mean, how dumb would it be to be like, yeah, this Korean drama was in Korean, so I did. Like, that's dumb. Like, obviously it's in Korean.
Right.
So, but, you know, for an international audience, like, it can, having the accessibility of perhaps a dub could be beneficial in moments like that. But I definitely don't think it's a requirement of any production to feel like they have to go through the trouble to dub, you know, something. It's just worth mentioning, I think. And I'm not really sure that I would have chosen this show if it had not been recommended to me. At first glance, I think it's kind of something that I'd be like, nah, sounds okay. But I'm glad that it was recommended to me, because I'm glad that I started watching it, because I really did enjoy it. And I think that it's interesting enough and different enough and new enough of a concept that I'm like, okay, I feel like I want to keep going with this, instead of just being like, I've seen this song and dance before. So for me, I definitely think I would like to keep going. So I went with 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay, so our last category is creativity. So out of a total possible score of 1, I give this 0.5 point out of 1. So I can't speak to how well this category applies in Korea, but in the US, from an American's perspective, it does feel a bit derivative. The show's plot does feel a bit derivative of Beauty and the Beast, with the plot of our main characters. This kind of enemies to lovers plot seems really obvious to me. The hotel plot and the setting in Korea make it much more of a creative story for a Western audience, but I can't really speak to whether or not this is an overused or overdone concept in Korean media or literature or film. So I think with a 50-50 first episode, half credit kind of makes sense to me. Okay. So I'm not saying it's not creative to a Western audience. This concept of, there being this hotel for, individuals who have unfinished business and are passing into the afterlife, and just the visuals, it being set in Korea, and, visuals and cultural aspects of that do make it very unique. So I think there should be some credit given for that. But overall, there's enough that does feel like it's already out there, that already exists, and it's not necessarily feeling fresh or new. So that's why I give it 0.5 points.
Okay. So for me, for creativity, I gave it the full point. So for me, I looked at this and I was like, we have had lots of media all over the world that kind of deal with this concept of like ghosts being unable to move on to the afterlife or whatever, and somebody has the job, responsibility, role of helping them move on. Like, that's been pretty prevalent. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say it's super common. It's not like every other film, or we get one a year or whatever. I'm not going to say that, but we've seen that before. But I think that Hotel de Luna does something new and neat enough. It's a new enough spin. It's a fresh enough concept that I don't mind the elements of it that feel familiar, because they're packaged in a way that feels new. So I don't really mind the fact that there could be like derivatory things, even though I didn't pick up or recognize as many derivatory things as maybe you did. But I still think that overall, it's not the newest concept under the sun, but I do think that all of these elements being pieced together in this new way feels fresh enough to me. Plus, learning about how well the show has done, not just in Korea but internationally, I think is something to be acknowledged as well as sort of like a milestone of the genre, since it has apparently become more iconic than I realized when I first started watching the show. So I wanted to use this space to also acknowledge that. So that's why I went with full creative point.
Cool.
All right, so with that, what did your overall score end up as?
My final score for episode 1 of Hotel de Luna is 5 out of 10.
Okay, and mine is 7 out of 10. So
nice.
Not too bad.
Not bad.
Very middle of the road-ish.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you have to say before I jump into some lightning round questions?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's worth a watch.
Yeah, me too. I'd like to keep watching.
Yeah.
So, okay. Favorite character?
Mulan.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would pick her too, Manuel.
Mm-hmm.
So, you'll keep calling her Mulan, and I'll try to use her actual character name.
Yep.
Least favorite character?
The dad.
Yeah, Chen Sung's dad.
He's the worst.
Oh my gosh. And I'm so mad that they basically killed him off before they could have any sort of redemption.
I'm glad he's gone. He's annoying.
Well,
he's annoying. I'm happy he's gone.
Okay.
Glad he died.
All right. Do you have a favorite scene?
I like the scene where the boss is in her office and she has all these diamonds and her manager is like, oh, nope, we gotta pay our debt. I don't know why. I just thought that scene was really, like, it was funny and humorous, but then I liked that it also kind of gave you an idea of like, oh, they have to use real money. Like, they actually have, like, you know, a permanent place in the real world. And so there has to be, but I liked that. And I thought it was just visually just really, really nice. Like, the sets were really nice in that scene, so I think that was probably my favorite scene.
I think my favorite scene, I don't know if it was my favorite scene plot-wise, but my favorite scene cinematically was definitely the subway scene. I just really loved their use of, like, really canted angles and, like, the lights and, you know, I know you didn't care for it as much cinematically, but I think it was probably my favorite cinematically. Scene.
I didn't mind it cinematically. I just the edit of it.
Okay, that's fair.
Particularly like.
That's fair.
So,
okay, is there anything that you would change about the way the magic is or works in the show?
No, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think the only thing I would change per se would just be like getting more information or getting clarification, but I wouldn't necessarily change anything like logistically.
Okay, that's fair. I'm trying to think of if there's any changes that I would make. I think what would be cool, maybe, and this is not really established, but maybe I'm predicting the future of the episodes, but I think what would be really cool is if at the Hotel de Luna, when you check in and you're staying and you go to your room, that your room is kind of like magically designed to be like the most ideal for that person, whoever, like, as they're checked in. Wouldn't that be neat?
Yeah.
Like, you walked in and it was like exactly your vibe and like, you know, aesthetic, like your style. I think that would be like a neat thing at the Hotel de Luna.
That would be cool.
Okay, next question. If you had to own a business for ghosts, what would you want that business to be?
Huh.
So, like, Manuel has a hotel for ghosts, but, like, if you had to own a business that ghosts frequent.
That's a good question. I don't know, maybe like a coffee shop or like a bodega kind of like store with a deli in it, or something like that. Yeah, I think something like that.
I think I would probably. It's probably very predictable of me, but like I'd probably want like a bookstore or library.
Yeah, that would be cool too.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, I'm not gonna hash out the why, but like it would be fun, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Okay. Is there any scene or plot point that you would change? And how would you change it?
I think I would just I would take out that whole point where she gives him the opportunity to leave. Because I feel like aside from that point, it feels, there are parts that maybe feel rudimentary, but nothing feels like nonsensical. And so I would just take that part out completely. Or I would make it so that he, instead of him feeling like he's kidnapped, I would give him some kind of decision to make where he now has to choose to stay. So kind of like, and I'm comparing this to Beauty and the Beast, but kind of like how in the Disney Beauty and the Beast, if you haven't seen it, spoilers. In the Disney Beauty and the Beast, Belle chooses to stay so that her father can leave.
Correct.
If his father is dead, it would be nice if like he chose to stay if it meant that like he could like watch his dad and make sure his dad gets to the afterlife, or maybe his dad is not allowed at the hotel because he doesn't have any money or something, and so he offers to like work off his debt. You know, give him some choice to stay versus where it's not like entrapment.
Right.
But instead of giving him an option to leave and then he doesn't. So that's what I would change.
I think I would change when they're having dinner and she's stabbing dumplings or whatever. I really, really would have liked a moment where she explains a little bit of the why he's there and why she made the deal in the first place and what her intentions are to like use him in the hotel. Because I think had they done that, had they given us a clearer expectation of her motive, then the scene that happens after in the alley would have made a little more sense, perhaps, or could have launched into like more clear character decisions in that scene. So kind of related to what you were saying, but I would change something a little earlier so that it launches differently the scene after.
Yeah.
So, okay, well that's it.
Alrighty.
Any other thoughts?
No.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time because we know that we did. If you have an idea of what we should review next, you can leave us a comment or use our suggestion box online at mousepodcast.com. You can also find links to our show notes, Patreon, and socials there as well. Our next episode is actually a viewer request, so we do take them and use them. So that could be you. Just let us know. If you could, please just review this episode wherever you listen to our podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, do all the YouTube things like comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. It really helps us to reach as many people as we can. We appreciate that support. Thank you so much for listening. We will catch you in the next one.